We're still thinking about it. You see, you're going to Sunday school? Cool. Well, it's good to be back.
Good to have you back.
An overheard conversation about the origins of kosher, written by somebody Jewish with a good sense of humor. God. And remember Moses, in the laws of keeping kosher, never cook a calf in its mother's milk. It is cruel. Moses. So, you're saying we should never eat milk and meat together? God. No, what I'm saying is never cook a calf in its mother's milk. Moses. Oh Lord, forgive my ignorance. What you are really saying is we should wait 6 hours after eating meat to eat milk so that the two are not in our stomachs at the same time. God. No, Moses, listen to me. I'm saying don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Moses. Oh Lord, don't strike me dead for my stupidity. What you mean is we should have a separate set of dishes for milk and a separate set of dishes for meat. And if we make a mistake, we have to bury that dish outside. God. Oy vey, Moses, do whatever you want. Wash your hands before supper. How often have we heard that? How often have we said that? The type of hand washing practiced by the Pharisees, however, was not about hygiene. They didn't know anything about germs. It was more symbolic than practical. They just took a small amount of water to wash away ritual defilement. So, here's your back to school background of the scripture part of the sermon for today. You know, the part that comes before the, okay, so what difference does this make to me now? Here's the context. The Pharisees, who followed the oral law, what they did was they took the original law that applied only to the priests going into the tent of meeting or near the altar in Exodus, and they applied it to all people at all times in wider terms. The oral law is what we now have as the Mishnah because typically, of course, the oral law was written down. It's a large collection of laws about how to keep the law. It's designed to do two things. First, to apply the eternal law of God in a contemporary situation, and second, to create boundaries to protect people from breaking the law, as my earlier illustration shows. So, to give an illustration, if going into a bar were against the law, the oral law that the Pharisees would come up with would state that going within 50 feet of a bar was against the law, because that would guarantee that you couldn't accidentally break the important law. This became a problem because even though the intentions were good, the unfortunate result was legalism on steroids. And the Pharisees gave the oral law pretty much equal status to the written law. Jesus was clearly no fan of the oral law, and his response was not particularly kind. In fact, it was downright confrontational. For the sake of brevity, our reading this morning left out the part where he specifically accused the Pharisees of hypocrisy for creating a way for people to dodge out of their responsibility to care for elderly parents. All elderly parents in the congregation say, "Yay, Jesus," because the Pharisees had worked circles around circles to enable people to do what they wanted to do. And Jesus was pretty angry about this. From the tone, we can say, you know, the Pharisees were probably pretty hostile too when they came. They were out to get him from the start. And he was not interested in their objections. So instead he said, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. As if these words of Jesus were not shocking enough, he then went on to say something that was truly outrageous for a devout Jew. And we don't get it. We don't know exactly how outrageous it was because we're not of that mindset. But he turned to them and he said, listen everyone and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. These are the evils that come from inside and defile a person. Well, that sounds reasonable to us, but it's hard for us to understand just how jarring these words would have been to the original hearers of this, because we don't know how important the dietary laws were to the Jews to keep them separate from the peoples around them. The Roman Empire threw everyone together. Most people just merged in and became one. There was a blending, except for the Jews. The Jews managed to stay separate, and they did it because of their dietary laws. They had their own marketplaces and their own butchers. Things had to be done a certain way. And they abstained from an awful lot of public social intercourse because they couldn't sit down and eat together with the other people without breaking kosher. This cut them off. It separated them. And that was a good thing in terms of the Jewish identity and self-understanding. And then Jesus goes and says, none of this really matters, because it's not what comes from the outside in, it's what comes from the inside out. Jesus had already demonstrated his objections to the oral law in practice many times. And his interpretation of the written law could be both wider and narrower than the Pharisees. He had the audacity to heal people on the Sabbath. He touched lepers. He blessed an unclean woman who touched him. He spoke to Samaritans. He spoke to women. Oh my goodness. He put mercy and compassion first in all circumstances. The attitude of many people at the time of Jesus was that God was honored by the fulfillment of external legal requirements. But Jesus, in line with the prophets, put the emphasis back on what is internal and ethical. It's not whether or not we complete a ritual or a prayer with accuracy that really matters. It's not found in the perfect adherence to the laws of kosher. We don't have to show up and look churchy and be correct. Those things are not important. What is important is how we treat one another. We should be focused on the thoughts and feelings that result in behavior that causes harm to others. Because what we nurture in our hearts will come out in our actions. The list that Jesus gives us is pretty devastating. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. And folly, by the way, is a complete lack of common sense. If you've ever known anyone with a complete lack of common sense, there you have it. Jesus spoke of it. These are the evils that come from within. Now, some of them come straight from the 10 Commandments. The 6th commandment, you shall not murder. The 7th, you shall not commit adultery. The 8th, you shall not steal. The 9th, you shall not bear false witness. And the 10th, you shall not covet. Sexual immorality, malice, lewdness, and arrogance are far more general in nature, but they all come from the heart, which is the center of who we are. There are things that we do, and there are things that we think. But in all cases, the thinking comes first. The evil that we do might include such concrete acts as promiscuity, theft, murder, slander, and adultery. But the thinking behind such acts includes greed, malice, deceitfulness, lewdness, envy, arrogance, and folly. Thinking is a very important part of the equation. The fabulous Greek word behind it, dialogismos, means careful calculation and reasoning. Jesus is not referring to that crazy, fleeting thought that we all experience. We all know crazy. We all have crazy. I think I'll punch my boss in the nose, but we don't do it. I think I'll stand up and scream at that faculty meeting or that workplace event, but we don't do it. We have crazy. It comes, it goes, it's gone. Jesus is talking about taking that forbidden thought, welcoming it in, giving it a nice place to live. And that's where the problem begins. It begins with a wrong act by welcoming a wrong thought in and rationalizing it. There is reason, calculation, and planning involved. But the thought life problems that Jesus mentions, although they seem extreme to us when we hear them read like that, they're common to all of us. We're all guilty, even if we try to point a finger at others. It is not just billionaires who are greedy. The average 2-year-old is greedy. Malice isn't just about what happens in Hollywood or politics. It's a nasty attribute quite at home in daily life. Haven't we all harbored the occasional malicious thought about a friend or coworker or neighbor? Malicious thoughts can turn into malicious speech and cause great damage. We're always appalled when we hear or read in the press about some caregiver who has exploited and deceived the elderly person they're caring for and robbed them blind. But we all deceive one another and ourselves in little tiny ways every day. And while we might not in our wildest dreams imagine that we're guilty of lewdness, switch on the TV. Watch one of the most popular entertainers on TV, and you will see lewdness. Stuff that a former generation would have not dreamed of putting on television. Admittedly, they went to the other side of the scale in their objection to human reality. But what we now have as mainstream is the objectification of human beings into sexual objects. This is what our teenagers are being raised with. They're being taught this is normal. Our children are being taught this is normal. We're being taught this is normal. To objectify someone on the basis of their appearance. I recommend changing the channel. We all envy. We all slander in the form of gossip. We all look down on people sometimes. And yes, we all lack common sense. Well, as Christians, we do not have to contend with how to keep kosher today. And if we wash our hands, it's because they're genuinely dirty and they need to be washed. And as far as eating, well, we do get all caught up in cholesterol and carbs and all of that stuff. But how much attention do we pay to what we feed our minds? Jesus said it's what's from inside our hearts, our minds, that works its way out into our actions. So what am I putting into my head? Without any effort at all, we'll all have crazy thoughts pop up. And since we're all sinners, we'll all be plagued sometimes by wrong thoughts. They're just going to be there, waving hello. It's what we do with them that matters. Because depending upon what we feed our minds, crazy and sinful will either flourish or wither. It is a basic fact that what we give more airtime will get stronger. Anyone who struggles with an addiction knows this. An alcoholic or an addict picks up a drink or a drug long before they pick up a drink or a drug. They start playing with the thought in their minds first. But the person who quickly redirects his or her thoughts to something positive stays sober. If I spend all my time pondering the wrongs done to me, I will become bitter. If I mentally criticize my coworkers every time I see them, my heart will grow angry and resentful. And watching lewd acts on TV or the computer will eventually lead to my diminishing other people into sexual objects. Jesus wants us to be vigilant over our hearts and minds. But here's a fact that I have learned. It doesn't work to just get rid of the negative. How many times have we looked at something bad in ourselves and tried to stomp it down and get rid of it and suppress it? And no, we won't have that. We're wasting our time. It's like digging a hole with no bottom. Because if we start to examine ourselves, we're always going to find something wrong. It'll just keep going and going. The way to deal with it is not to just find all the negative, it's to put in the positive instead. We have to replace one with the other. And God has given us the tools to do this. Am I struggling with greed or envy? The antidote to that is gratitude. To start consciously taking note of all of the good things in my life, all of the blessings, even writing a list if I have to. Some people do that. They write gratitude lists. And before I know it, my heart and my mind will have changed. Am I resentful of my coworkers? If I start and take it upon myself to pray for them every time that resentful thought comes in, and to really pray for them, for God to bless them and help them and be with them in their lives, then my relationship with them will change. My heart will change, they will change, and God will give me new insight in how to relate to them. You're going to have to take my word on this. I've done it. It works. If I find myself looking down on another person, what I need to remember is this: there, but for the grace of God, go I. I have not walked in their shoes. I don't have their physical biochemistry. I don't have their childhood, their background. Whatever it is, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And if I've started judging people based on their sexual attractiveness and physical nature alone, apart from changing the channel, which is a good idea, by the way, if I pray for that person that I see on the street or on the television or on the computer, and start to really pray for them, then I start to realize that they are three-dimensional people. People with a past, a present, a future. People who actually have lives and struggles. And you know what? It's really hard to objectify a three-dimensional person. It's really hard to objectify someone when you know that they have heartbreaks and doubts and fears and struggles and hopes and dreams. Because then they're people. They're real. And that other issue just goes away. Meditating on Scripture is another way that transforms our minds and our thinking. Praying and asking God to help us see people as God sees people will make us compassionate and merciful as God is compassionate and merciful. What is inside of us will come out. Always. Guaranteed. It is tempting to look for the solution to spiritual problems in external rules. Do this, don't do that. We all want to look good, but Jesus wants us to be good. Amen.